Hey there, Joel here from cosinesound.com.au. Thanks for joining me today. So in this video, I'm going to look closer at the Karplus-Strong Synthesis method and also take a closer look at the Multicomb effects, which comes with Absynth. And we'll find that both of these, especially the Karplus-Strong, is a very simple and high quality effect, but when combined together in the multicomb effects, we get some very interesting and very imaginative sounds. So, I'm just going to list on the screen. If anyone is very quite familiar with Karplus-Strong, they can skip to the multicomb part of the video. So just note the timestamp there if you're interested. Otherwise, keep watching and we'll start with the Karplus-Strong. And also at the end of the video, I'll go into some subtle facts about the perception of pitch as well. Great, so the basis of Karplus-Strong synthesis is a noise pulse that is sent through a delay feedback loop. And so Karplus-Strong traditionally uses an additive approach to the circuitry, but we'll call them delays. Since they happen very rapidly, we're talking about very small wavelengths, and it turns out that all the frequencies, as you'll see in this diagram, the famous MIDI notes graph, the duration of the wavelengths of the musical tones we can hear are very small. They range from A0, for example, at 36 millisecond period, all the way down to less than a millisecond at 0.2 at the very top end of the keyboard. So these sounds are very short, and there's even lower notes that are used in music that are lower than A0 that extend the range down to less than 20 hertz. A0 was already a very low note as it is, and we're talking about a delay of 36 milliseconds. Very, very short. And so we wouldn't normally think of them as delays because they are, again, they're so extremely short, and we perceive them as more of a flanging type effect or a chorus or a resonating effect. We don't really hear them as actual delays, but nevertheless, that's the main principle behind it. So I'll get back to that diagram again soon. It was initially designed to be an effective method of producing plucked strings on cheaper processors. Most, if not all, digital music synthesizers require fast arithmetic or, high processing to get rich natural sounds. But Karplus-Strong synthesis can be implemented quickly and easily. As I said, it's just a sound that is sent through a delay line, a feedback loop, and traditionally with a low pass filter. So if I just go back to set this to a noise oscillator. So I made a white noise oscillator some time ago. And yeah, just to continue, the KPS can be implemented quickly and easily. At the time, they used this synthesis method with an Intel chip, which could only have 2 megahertz processing power. So it's very simple, straightforward. And we can even implement this technique using any means by which we can send a short sound through a delay loop, like even a tape delay effect or an effects unit that we can set the feedback and set a delay time that is within a very short delay time. So here we've just envelope, I've just made an envelope that is about 20 milliseconds long. Very simple burst, and it contains all the frequencies, so that's important because it'll enable the resonator or the flanging effect to equally affect all the frequencies. Whereas if we change the noise burst to another sound, we'll get a different timbre. So if I change this to, for example, a single oscillator and just pick, for example, organ, we're getting different tones coming through and definitely not getting all the frequencies. And I've also got that randomizing happening on there, so it's even more predictable than what we just heard. So I take this down to 0 again and then choose organ. You'll notice that we get these much more direct frequency patterns and spectrums. Let's just go back to the noise wave table, which is, there we go. Okay. So we'll send this through the Multicomb, which is already got the right settings for us. And just paying attention to the top unit, the master section, we've got a time setting. And again, we're dealing with very short times, although the maximum is 1.25 seconds. So we'll find that that is quite a long delay time. So we could get some quite interesting and complicated multi-delays here if we wanted to. For, resonating notes and plucked strings, it's better to go with the lower delay times. As you can hear, if I use this maximum delay time, it's quite a drawn out sound. 1 second and a quarter is a very long time in this circumstance. So let's take it down. Until we start to hear a pitch. I'll turn the surround on to pan at center. So what you'll find is that you'll be able to reproduce and identify the sound of Karplus-Strong comb filtering, not only because of the simplicity of the technique, but also because of how acoustically natural and frequent comb filters appear in the world. The processing demand in Karplus-Strong is significantly less, especially in comparison to additive synthesis, and can achieve a comparably high quality sound. And this was noted in the paper, which I'll link in the description. So you would say this is a high quality sound because it happens very naturally. In other words, it sort of reverberates very naturally and simply, and by following very simple principles. And one of those principles is, apart from the feedback amount, is the low pass filter. So if we want a dampened sound, then putting a low pass filter in the feedback loop will give a... Okay, so it's more of a rolled off kind of effect where the sound becomes duller over time. And decreasing the feedback, this should make it happen more rapidly. Now our tuners started to come into play here. If I just bring up that chart again, we'll see that A0, the lowest note on the scale, is 36.36 milliseconds. All right, so let's do an example. So we'll tune this to 36 milliseconds. And just keep in mind the amount or the number of decimal places here is a bit more than a standard millisecond. It's actually two. It's actually two extra. So that would be 16 milliseconds, and then we'll go to 36.36. There we go, A0. Now I'll just mix out the dry signal. Pan center again. Increase the feedback. It's really cool to be able to have 100% feedback on the Absynth here, and you'll notice how the sound pretty much is going to hang around for a long time, but it is being filtered out very, very gradually due to the low pass. It's really inevitable that the low pass is part of the circuit, and even though this is set to maximum, the very slope is gradually rolling off the sound there. So just to make that a bit more obvious, I'll just change the feedback to about 99%, which is probably more what we would find more often and probably a safer level. If you just watch the higher frequencies die down. So that's known as damping. And of course, lowering the feedback, we get a much shorter sound that is less resonant. And that's quite significant as the feedback drops below 90% even. Well, yeah, around 60%. I tend to just favor the 90s, I suppose. So yeah. So that is A0, and that's the lowest note according to the piano roll. But let's change the note. All right, so let's change the note to, what shall we go with? How about we go with C4, which is 261 hertz and 3.822 milliseconds. So if we go lowering this amount. There we go. Just double checking, 3.822, yeah. Very nice. So, and I'll reference that and double check with the oscillator that I have. Yep, that's perfectly in tune. So quite extraordinary how many octaves we just jumped up. So that was 4 octaves. Now this is our fundamental tone. This is actually going to be the lowest frequency we can use on the multicomb. So if I add another multicomb now, that will be this one here. Let's change it to C5, and we do this by halving the percentage, similar to lowering the time in seconds, we're also effectively lowering the time in seconds to, for example, 0.001 and so on. So now we have a C4 and a C5. And so on. If I add another one at 25%, that would be another octave higher. That would also be C6. If I just play that by itself. Now I can tweak the feedback to let's say, for example, I want the higher note to have a shorter duration. I would do something like this. Or inversely, if I want the fundamental tones to die out quicker, then I would use this. A similar technique is to use the low pass and suggest the maximum is less than 100%. So, for example, setting it to 80 would mean that the maximum cutoff frequency is going to be lower than this maximum. It gives more of a muted, muffled sound. And of course, again, we have the stereo panning, which can create some very unique spaces and stereo images. We can also add another tone. Of course, all of these layers can be different notes, and we can just use our ears to decide. I think that's, what note is that? That's G. So it's helpful to remember, and there would be a formula for working out the note, which I'll put on the screen, based on the percentages, or should I say based on the durations. We can work out what the percentage is of the fundamental frequency. So by referencing these periods here, now again, I can change all of these reference tones again by changing the master time. It's basically like transposing those tones. If we do tune the sound very low, we might get some low frequency build up here, so we can make sure to filter out those sub-frequencies. Now there's another interesting technique to use, and that's to use negative feedback, which is similar to changing the polarity of the comb filter. So all of these layers can be inverted in the polarity, and that will change the tonality to more of a hollow sound. The reason is because these negative feedbacks are now changing the they're changing the nodes to resonate on the odd nodes rather than the even nodes. If I just go with one comb filter for now, I'll just demonstrate this. Okay, so in this case, the positive feedback is resonating at the second, fourth, the sixth, and the eighth harmonic. That's because these are octave harmonics, and they're all double integers, and hence they're called even harmonics. Whereas if we inverted the feedback, we would get the odd harmonics, which now you can see that now the first harmonic is now resonating, and subsequently the third and the fifth, seventh and the ninth are resonating as well. What we also find is that the octaves are actually a little difficult to pick out, because we can't actually hear the octave frequencies in the sound as well, so the tuning is now a little difficult to hear. So if, for example, we looked at the fundamental frequency, which is, let's say that's 84 Hertz, then the octave multiple of 84 would be the second harmonic, and that would be 168 Hertz. But of course, you can see it's not there. And similarly, the octave multiple of the third harmonic should be the sixth harmonic, which is also not here. So there may be some constructive feedback going on further down the spectrum, but it's very difficult to perceive the pitch of that. So again, just to reinforce that, the negative polarity will give more pipe sort of timbres and even flute-like or pan flute type hollow sounds. Something I haven't tried before is including both positive and negative at the same time. This might be better illustrated with the 2D spectrum by just holding down these notes. So I'm playing two comb filters at the same time. Now what happens when I remove the hollow sounding one? It almost sounds like it's jumped up an octave. And that's because, technically it has, because now the fundamental frequency is the second harmonic. Whereas having the first harmonic, now this sound is merged into a lower octave. can also use the gain amounts to mix that in and out. Might just change this envelope so it's a looping envelope and that plucking sound repeats. You can also double up some of these comb filters so there's more of a beating sound happening. That's a very warm sound there. You can see that there's beating sounds. Okay, well, looking at the highest frequency, the highest frequency we can hear, according to this keyboard, is C8, and that's going to have a fundamental frequency at 4K, and the duration is about 0.2 milliseconds, so it's very, very fast period there. Let's see what that sounds like there. 0.2 is about here, I believe. No, let me just double check. 0.23, let's say 0.24. So that would be up here somewhere. And that was, again, C8. 0.2389. I wonder what's happening there. There seems to be a bit of a discrepancy. Anyway, that should appear up here somewhere. But what you notice is that the tone color of the comb filter is basically moved out of range, so we won't actually get any comb filtering sound from that. Just to talk more on the perceived pitch. So the Gabor limit for duration was mentioned in Andy Farnell's Designing Sound, whereby the shortest sound of discernible pitch is around 20 milliseconds. And this is just for the duration of a single sound. For more background on the Gabor limit, in reference to spectrograms, I've uploaded a video on that as well. In that case, it's referencing the relationship between the time frame of a signal and the frequency resolution. So going back to that impulse or that trigger sound, this is about 26 milliseconds long, but it's not a wavetable. It's actually a noise oscillator. If I just reset this, change it to something more discernible like a sine wave or a saw wave. So we still perceive pitch with that. It's very much starting to disappear. As I lower the duration, just under 13 milliseconds, it starts to become ambiguous what the actual pitch is. And that's due to the continuity of the sound is disappearing and the spectrum is flattening. Looking at this 2D spectrogram, you can see how lacking in tone that the sound is, and how broadband it is now. It's basically become an impulse sound, especially under about 10 milliseconds especially. So we can't hear the pitch of that pulse because it is so short. That also applies if the sound is a noise burst. However, the noise burst from the earlier demonstration has no fundamental frequency. But by adding a delay, the possibility changes. So the longer delays won't create a perceivable pitch. Notice how the timbre has changed into into a less, I guess you could say, less brittle sound, because the slope of the impulse is different than the slope of the noise. The white noise is more of a flat sound, flat spectrum, whereas the sawtooth impulse is quite curved. It's very peculiar how much of a difference that makes, but you can basically see we can't hear any of the tones or any of the harmonics, and I believe this spectrum is actually quite accurate in depicting that, because honestly I don't know what pitch that is, but once we put a delay on that and create a continuous sound, so it's only by having a continuous sound that we can perceive the pitch, and also the pitch has to have some periodicity to it, which contrasts to the white noise, which has no periodicity about it. So periodicity, if that is actually a word, I believe it's a word, it relates to this delay, essentially. So it's been described that we can perceive pitches down to around 18 hertz, or at least the upper harmonics. The wave period would be around 55 milliseconds. So again, as the period is shorter, the individual pulses begin to fuse and a pitch is heard. So 18 hertz would be a note that is off this scale. It would be like a negative note, like negative something, and that would be 55 milliseconds. So let's give that a try. I'll just go back to the white noise. I'm just trying to remember where it is. Okay, there it is. So, yep, it's these decimal places. 55. So apparently this is going to be about 18 hertz. Maybe if I change this to flat log. I think there is an option to extend that lower frequency. Well, it doesn't show up on this graph apparently. Here we go. Yeah, look, I mean, good enough. I mean, that sounds like pretty much like a sub-frequency to me. Just one. Yeah, look, I mean, that's gotta be that. It's gotta be that low. It's almost like the graph doesn't want to go that low, but it does. It should. Just going back to my other example of the highest pitch. Isn't it striking how the tuners can determine what pitch that is? I mean, the question is, can we determine what it is? Can we really hear a pitch from that? It's like we can, but can we really identify what note it is? Could we really identify that pitch, and would you play a tune with these notes? Maybe those are different kind of questions. Well, that's it for this video on multicomb and comb filters. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe and press the bell button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.